So just some of the services that we do offer. So obviously Microsoft Azure, some of you are customers, so you will know. And we offer data services, which is around Azure Databricks, Microsoft Fabric, Microsoft Power BI, Power Apps, and the entire Power Platform. We do some managed services. We do advisory services around how do you develop a data strategy, how do you set up your data governance, how do you data quality, how do you do compliance, and how do you architect the right solution to meet your business objectives. And then we also do security. We do training, disaster recovery, and hardware and software development as well. So just on what's on the agenda today, so it's not a big agenda. What we'll do is why we need to secure our databases and what options we have available, and then I'll do a demo. Right, so there will be a couple of demos. I might just go through when I do each one, talk about each option that we have, just show you, or I'll skip ahead and just do the demos and entirely skip the slides. Cool. So before we get to, if we want to make this as interactive as possible, right? So you guys can unmute your mics and ask questions at any time. How many of you have your databases in Azure at the moment, or your SQL service in Azure at the moment? Anyone? Cool, nobody. If you don't want to unmute your mic, you're welcome to type in the chat window. Okay, so so why do we want to secure our SQL server? Traditionally, we have a firewall, we use AD authentication, and we have SQL authentication, and we encrypt our database. Now that was it. If anybody broke in, we normally blame networks or the security team. But now if I look at just this year alone, our regulators saying that South Africans are not taking cybersecurity seriously, or security for that matter. And going from having 56 data breaches a month last year to 156 a month this year. So how many of that have you heard about in the news? Right? So there was maybe one or two. Right? But I mean, nothing. And that obviously leads to financial losses. So far, that's cost South Africa, they estimate that cost South Africa about 2.2 billion per year. So it's not cheap. So if I look at global data breaches, just so far, still about May. As you can see, there is in 9,000, almost 9,500 cases for 2024 so far. That was just up until May, right? About 35 billion records breached. So every year, IBM and the Penang Institute do a cybersecurity study, right? And they look at they do a data breach study, and they look at what does data breaches cost in various countries, at least the 16 countries that are here. Luckily, South Africa is one of them. And ours actually dropped by like $100,000 this year for what it cost per breach. Right? This is the average cost per breach, per data breach in a country. And for now, South Africa is like number 14, but if we don't pull up our socks, we will end up being in that top 5 since everyone, since there's so many, since we're experiencing 156 breaches monthly on average, 150 data breaches monthly. So just think of that amount of money. That's I think Boston, Massachusetts was the first state in the US at the provincial level to actually to introduce a penalty for any data breach. So for every data record lost, they introduced a penalty of $5,000. So now imagine if you're losing 1,000 records. I mean, it's still a lot of money. And in the South African context, it's massive, especially when you think of what the dollar exchange is and that a lot of multinationals operate here or from here. So cost of data breaches by country or by industry. So healthcare and financial services are massive. You look at the tech industry, industrial people are going after IoT. That's also becoming a big one. And people are actually using AI. People actually also, so if you look at, this is not nothing to do with databases, but it's out of something. If you look at Vodacom and SIM swaps, a couple of months ago, we had an issue where one of my family members' SIM cards were swapped without their knowledge while they were traveling. And when we queried, I spoke to some people at Vodacom to find out how that happened and who was the login. People were actually doing it via Vodacom's chatbot. But because that's because the security around the chatbots are lackadaisy, for lack of a nicer word. And people exploited the chatbot. And that's happening more and more around the world. And what is missing from a South African context is we have a big skills gap in security, DBAs, in general IT people. And it takes us, or the world as well, it takes on average, it takes longer. So if you guys look here, right, you'll see this is mean time to identify an incident. That's 194 days. It came down a lot by at least 20 days. No, 10 days compared to last year. And then this is mean time to close, to contain, mean time to contain, right? So 64 days. So all in all, you're looking about almost a year, or 3/4 of a year, 258 days to identify and contain a data breach. So I'm sure every one of you have heard about SQL injection. And so that is when people exploit databases or your SQL servers via the internet. And that can be as simple as going to a login, to your website's login page and exploiting it through there. So here was a study done on 27,000 databases, on-premise databases globally. Right? So people have a thing around, yes, our databases are secure, but that's simply because they haven't experienced a breach yet or anything, or any security breach yet. So to them, this is secure, everything is running, don't fix what's not broken. Right? And what they found was that 49%, 46% of these databases all contain vulnerabilities. Right? So they're not as secure as people think. We had one of the listed companies call me and say, listen, we need access to our payroll database. Well, yeah, they wanted access to the payroll database, but they can't get it because everybody left. But you still work on it, and I'm like, cool. Send me a nice mail to tell me that you want me to break into your SQL server and there will be no repercussions for me because it's a business request. As soon as they sent me that, the CIO sent me that, 5 seconds later, I broke it. And it took me 5 seconds because they didn't really have any security on it. Just the traditional stuff. Because they thought they were protected by their firewall. So, how many of you guys have SQL servers on, or how many of you guys still have SQL servers on prem? You guys can unmute if you want to. Cool. So, this is a overview of what security looks like. There's multiple layers of security that Azure offers. So, as you can see, there's the network security, which is the front layer that hits. Then there's the access management, which is what we provide, or access that gives to people. Then there's Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection. So that detects who's trying to break it. And I'll show you guys how that looks from a portal. And then there's information protection, so that is through Purview, and then you've got your customer data, right? So on your customer data, you can still do a whole bunch of stuff to ensure that it's secure. So if we look at our options, right? So before we only had SQL authentication, database encryption, or transparent database encryption at least. And that requires a certificate. So if you lose that certificate, you're screwed. Right? And the only secure option you had was use AD and hide behind the firewall. Use AD authentication for your databases and hide behind the firewall. Over the years, SQL has evolved a lot, and so has Azure. And what I've learned through experience is look at what's around me and what can I use that's best of breed around me and help me secure my SQL environment. Right? Because the last thing you want is if somebody comes and they stole your data, or somebody breaches your environment and steals your data. As somebody that looks after SQL servers, it's not a nice feeling. I know that because I speak from experience. And it's happened to me. And luckily, in my case, it was a dev environment where somebody stole credit cards. And that had me in a tailspin for a couple of weeks to come up with a solution where not even internal people can see data. And Microsoft then brought out row-level security. Only took them 10 years later, but they brought in a row-level security nonetheless, which helps a lot. Right? So you can only see what you need to see. And it's the whole separation of duties to the extent where if you're this administrator, you don't need to see the data. You only need to administer the server. You don't need to know what's inside the database from a data perspective. Only people working with the data need to see what's in there. You've got database auditing. It's you've got on-prem, you've got a couple of DDL scripts that you can run, and SQL will then implement database auditing. You can say how you want it, which activities do you want it to track. So whether that's update, deletes, and you can then also put in triggers that will do rollbacks for you. So if somebody does a certain action and they're not allowed to, you can then roll it back automatically. I used to do that to developers. in our dev environment just to test my stuff, and then make them sweat because they can't do anything. So advanced threat protection is one of the easiest things to implement from a Microsoft side, especially in Azure, because you can deploy it. You can add your on-prem service, and you can add your Azure services, obviously. That maps for you, it picks up what type of threats people want, or how people are trying to attack your environment, what type of scripts they're trying to run. It traces the IP for you. So if they're coming through a VPN, it will still show you where that is showing. And the scripts that the scripts that they're trying to run, and also what you need to do to fix it. And they've even made it a lot easier. They've just put a button there that says fix. Right? So you can just deploy those fixes now. Transparent database encryption. So that is something that you normally enable at the database level in SQL Server, and you define the key and the certificate for that. So if somebody does take a backup, it gets backed up with that certificate, and if somebody tries to steal that backup from you, take a backup of premises, they can't just restore it. They will need a key and certificate. Right? Key management with Key Vault, so you can do your database keys, your TE keys. You can store that in SQL or Key Vault along with your usernames and passwords for SQL. So that when people log in, at first they reference as Key Vault and see if they are authenticated to use it. If not, sorry. Config checks. So Microsoft actually released the API publicly for Microsoft for SQL best practices, where it will run continuously, and you can query that against your servers to see if you're compliant with the recommended practices. It might be a bit skewed based on the workloads, because they just use a set of standard best practices. It's only now that they're starting to bring in AI to look at what your workloads do and then to adjust your SQL Server accordingly. But that's still a good couple of months out. Then always encrypted is probably one of my favorite mechanisms to ensure that SQL Server is secure. So do any of you know what always encrypted is or heard of it? Yeah, so always encrypted is a more secure way, right? So to secure your data. So you can do this at row level, and this does a complete separation. So there's a couple of sides to always encrypted. So you can go and you can say, okay, cool, always encrypted. I've got X amount of columns I want to do. So when nobody can see it, only the people that's supposed to have access to that data can see it. So what it does is it encrypts the driver between the application and the database. So you've got no access to that. So even if I'm the DBA with sysadmin rights, I can't see that data because that column has been encrypted. Only the people, so even if I work in say for example, a call center, as the DBA, I won't be able to see that data, but the call center agent will be able to see it because they've got the right access. Or they've got access to see the data, I don't. But that also does come with its concerns, like everything else. There is a performance hit that you will take. So, general rule of thumb, if you're doing encryptions, if you're using any sort of encryptions, always add like 2 extra CPUs to cover for the overhead, for the performance overhead. And then there's the other side, which is always encrypted with enclaves, right? So this is at the hardware level. So there's a certain portion of the chip on the CPU that SQL will use for the encryption of that data. So it doesn't do the encryption inside of the SQL engine. It does it outside of the SQL engine, which makes it a lot more difficult for people to decode that to try and hack into your systems. So then you take that, and you will have to add a couple of CPUs for that one, but it will decrypt and encrypt via the CPU. And then we've got dynamic data masking. That's a dynamic data masking. You can set up to also just through Management Studio, so you can go and mask data, and certain groups of people can only see it. So if, for example, credit card numbers, if somebody logs into your database or queries a table, and they should not be able to, when they're not allowed to see the real true values of that data, they will just see a bunch of gibberish. And then Microsoft has also introduced vulnerability assessments. So this has been coming on long already. So vulnerability assessments and data classification. So in SQL Management Studio, you can right-click on a database and say vulnerability assessment or data discovery classification, and it will go and generate reports for you of 332 rules, might be more now, but last much it was 332 rules that it checks against for vulnerabilities. And it will tell you this is wrong with your database or your data, and this is your database, and this is how you need to protect it, and what you can do from a remedial point of view. Data classification, that will tie into Purview. So I don't know how many of you have heard about Microsoft Purview. Right, so there's two sides to Purview. The one side is the one that's built into Office 365. And what I like to refer to the dark side, which is where you can actually catalog your data, build in some rules, make sure everybody's compliant with every rule and industry standard known to man, and check also data lineage. And then you've got the Microsoft Compliance Center, so Security Center, where you can get a big overview of what's happening in your environment. And then the one that I forgot to add on here was Azure Arc. So if you're running on-prem and you want to leverage Microsoft's Azure services, you can Arc enable your service. So it's an extension that you install. And then download a script when you enroll it and just run it on your service. So what that does is that allows you to run Microsoft services, Azure services on your on-prem environment. So if you have the hardware to support containers, you can run things like SQL Managed Instance, Azure SQL Database, Microsoft Cloud Defender, all those type of things you can run against your environment. And that also runs across cloud as well. Oh, let me just get to that. Let's just do a demo. Then my keys are not working. And then I got that. Cool. Let's just do that. So you've got in Azure, you've got your resource groups, right? So here's mine. That's for demo I'm planning to do next week. Let's go into this one. So now I have my favorite version of SQL, which is Managed Instance, which is the full version of SQL Server just as a service. That's so you don't have access to the hardware or the OS. That's one I can do. That's it. Cool. So let's start here. So NSGs is a network security tool, right? So through here, it's like a firewall, a more localized file. So through here, I can control anything inbound, outbound to my servers, and I can deny those servers. And I can specify which port I want those to come in. Right? The other great part about using this type of stuff, the networking side, is I can associate these my networks. So I can peer networks. Right? So if I'm just trying to find this network. So one of the other ways to secure SQL Server via the networking component is peering. So even if you're in Azure, you can turn off, or you can ask your network administrator to either allow peering between resource groups in Azure or not allowed. The other ones are disabling public access, right? So you can set up endpoints and then use those endpoints, but you can also make it internal or external endpoints, public or internal only. So auditing. So we spoke about auditing, right? So I can go turn on auditing. So here it says it's disabled, and it's as easy. Instead of me having to go run a multitude of scripts, I can just do that. I can say I want to log analytics. Um, so I specify my subscription. I specify where I wanted to send the logs. And even if I want to take it further, I can enable this use Ledger for auditing and compliance. So if you don't know yet, but SQL has blockchain built into it. But you can then enable auditing, and that will allow you to see what's happening on your database. Then we have the data classification. Don't know what it is. Cool. So as you can see here, I can add different masks to it. Right? So if I say add mask, right, so now I've got first name, last name, and here's the mask function. So I can go into that. I can just say, cool, use this default to mask first name, and I can see there. And I can put in my own as a custom, and then there's one for credit cards and stuff as well. But here, I can go and I can specify who can see it, who's always excluded, or who can see this data that I'm asking. Then we've got data encryption. That's a TDE, transparent database encryption, always known as Old Faithful. And you can turn that on. So you can do that at the database level or a server level. So mine is set to the server level, so I know that everything is encrypted there. From a management point of view, it makes it easy for me. Best practice, however, do it at the database level. Right? So if you turn it on at the database level, you then go and configure it. So that's just your manage identity. Right? I did not set up, but that's a service principal, same like a SQL service account. So you enter and you run it with that. And then you can put in your key. Mine is system manage. So I can go, that's a hardware one, or I can say go to Key Vault, and I've set a, this will do it once you've set up everything inside of Key Vault. Anyone have any questions? Cool. So when I set up the database, I configured it to use always encrypted, so that when I go through Management Studio to the database, I can actually use it. Not with enclave. So this is the more advanced version of it, where it uses the CPU to store some of the to do the encryptions and decoding of it. And then the piece de resistance is the mind is still trying to. That one was. My VM is down, so it's not picking that up. So this is a very, very powerful tool, but Microsoft Defender for Cloud, before you had to run very expensive Microsoft or very expensive tools to secure your network and your databases, and then you still have to fight with the database and the firewall because they don't perform well together. And especially if on-prem. As you can see at the bottom, Defender runs across clouds, so you can monitor everything from here. If you have stuff in AWS, GCP, on-prem, you can monitor everything from here. Right now, mine is looking pretty awesome because I don't really have much in it. The alerts that you see are all sample alerts that I have just created for this demo. So I can see where I have it on. So it's on my VM, it's on my SQL server, it's on my managed instance. It's not on my SQL DB, so that explains a lot. So here's a list of my recommendations. So it says your managed authentication mode is not set up properly, and my managed instance network settings are wrong. What can I do to take action? So currently, this is very important, right? Because if you do get hacked, or somebody's trying to access it, it will show you exactly where, or what they're trying to do. But for me, this is a warning at the moment. I must go and fix it. It tells me what type of action I need to take. So there's not a lot of, you don't have to go put in, you don't have to go, it saves you the time in the sense that you don't have to go and do the investigations as to where everybody's coming from. That's I can see what's happening on my VM, what's going on there. So I see there's 10 recommendations. I see backups are not enabled, EDR, config issues, my management ports, but I can also see risk levels, right? So my machine is basically unhealthy at this moment. So when I said there's a fix button, here's the fix button. So if I click on this, it will go and fix it. Go fix. And that's how easy it is to do. Well, but this is all part of your SQL environment, and you won't know that these. If you don't go look, you won't find that these are and they're done, fixed. That's it. Anybody have any questions? Because you guys are awfully quiet. And you can then also enforce this policy as a policy across your SQL service. But by the way, if you deploy managed instance, be prepared to wait 6 hours because it takes up to 6 hours. I know that the team are working on reducing it, but the newer one is taking about 20 minutes to deploy. So you can ask your security team to work with you to one set up Bastion and obviously your firewall. But the peerings I was talking about, if I have a network, whether it's on-prem or in Azure, to add the different subnets, I can go here and I can go peer that network. So then it will be able to see. So my resource, my migration, everybody in this demo resource group appeared will be able to see, will have access to the Azure Managed Instance. And then you can change your settings there. We'll tick all the boxes that's required, and then you can add it. And let's say we can go to for your DDoS protection. You could either enable or disable it on this network. Further from your overall security that you have, and obviously Cloud Defender. And then also on whatever service endpoints there are. And if there are any private endpoints, I don't have, mine is all public. Simply because I didn't want to set up an Azure jump box. And then obviously always making sure that the right people or in the right groups and the right people have access. If you want to make it a difficult process, make them fill in forms. People don't like filling in forms. I used to do that to people. Give them 3 pages to fill in all unnecessary information, and then they never come back. I just want to show you guys something. So I can generate a governance report from here, where it will highlight what risk we have. But there's also options to actually see it on a map. This is actually what I want to show you. Yeah. So if you guys have access to Azure, or you guys are playing around with you want to on security, then I recommend you go into the security center and trial the Microsoft services there. So depending for SQL specifically, there's a $15 a month charge. First 30 days is free. So just some takeaways from this, right? So prevention is better than cure. So we always want to protect our data, and we have that. Also, your TLS levels. If you speak to your developers, the certificates and stuff that they use, always make sure that the TLS level is 1.2. As SQL now only supports, or Azure SQL it runs on 1.2 and not 1.1 like most applications. And then also we want to control access, whether that be through row level security, data masking, and we want to do proactive monitoring. So there are tools that do proactive monitoring for you. One is the Microsoft Defender, or as it's called, Microsoft Defender for SQL, and the auditing that you will have to enable and then proactively monitor and keep a watchful eye on your SQL server. Then here's just some resources that I use to put this stuff together. So Nightly Installers, that is actually a pen tester for SQL Server specifically. And Africa Cyber Threat Assessment, then you guys can go check out that. And there's some Channel 9 videos and the rest all you will find on Azure, on Microsoft Learn site as well. Oh, cool. Well, thank you for your time today. And attending. We will send out the deck and we will also, Jay will post the recording somewhere. And then we'll also send out updates with our next webinars and what they're about. The next one will probably be around migrating to SQL, migrating your on-prem SQL server into Azure and the benefits.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a great day further.